Do you use a mouse with your computer? Do you own a computer keyboard? Have you ever taken aspirin, been given penicillin, or been prescribed a generic version of a branded medication? Does your car have a catalytic converter? Ever purchased toothpaste with fluoride in it? How about a microwave oven? Now, what in the world does this have to do with Behringer? Because that's exactly the topic of today's show. Stick around.
You're listening to The Dangerous Mind of Mark Yoshimoto Nemkov. No excuses, no BS, no pants.
Welcome back to the Microphone Playboy podcast. Today, we are diving into a topic that has been heating up the audio world. And not just recently, I mean for quite a while. It's like that zit on your face that won't go away. I'm talking about Behringer and their cloning practices and the emotional wave of outpouring that brings from people, good, bad, or otherwise. This is going to be a long topic, but I want you to stick around because there is someone who left a comment that sums up, I think, many of our relationships with Behringer. It crystallizes it so perfectly. And I want to read you that comment because I have a feeling this is going to hit a bullseye with some people. But I'm going to do that later on. So stick around. Make sure you stick around for that. Now let's get back to it. Let's get back to the debate and drama. Let's talk about why this matters. Now, all those everyday items I just mentioned, mice, keyboards, generic drugs, microwaves, they're all based on designs and technologies that fell out of patent protection decades ago. And yet, nobody seems to have a problem with companies making their own versions of these things. So, why is it that when Behringer does the same thing with audio gear, people lose their freaking minds? Let's break it down. And trust me, there is a lot to unpack here. Now, let's start with the computer mouse, right? It was invented in the 1960s and patented in the 1960s. And then by the 80s, the patent had expired. Now, today, countless companies make mice, and nobody accuses them of stealing ideas or undermining the original investors. In fact, we celebrate the competition and innovation that comes from it, right? Wireless mice, ergonomic designs, gaming mice with the RGB lighting in it. The expiration of the mouse patent has been a net positive for consumers. So, if we're okay with companies making mice, right? Why do we have such a problem with Behringer making clones of classic audio gear, right? This just fascinates me, this whole topic, because it has a lot to do with human psychology, just completely fascinates me. The principles here are the same. Once a patent expires, the technology is fair game. It is literally defined as being in the public domain once a patent expires. And the patent duration is 20 years. Okay? Now, for example, Behringer 676 is a clone of the Universal Audio 6176. I mean, it's attempting to be a pretty much a dead-on clone, right? But the 6176 is based on designs from the 1960s and 1970s, and let me tell you, the patents those are based upon are as expired as Jacob Marley's ghost. So legally and even ethically, believe it or not, Behringer is in the clear, but somehow they're still the bad guys. Now, why is that? Why are Behringer the bad guys? Well, you probably know the answer to this, or at least you probably have an idea why. Now let's address that big old elephant in the room, all right? Behringer has earned quite a bit of a, let's just call it sleaze factor over the years. From questionable business practices to social media antics, they've given people plenty of reasons to view them with skepticism, to say it very lightly. And that's fair. Because if you're side-eyeing Behringer because of their past behavior, I totally get it. But let's not confuse their reputation with the legality or ethics of what they're doing now. Okay? Let's not forget, Universal Audio, right? The victim here in this in this alleged intellectual property crime that has been committed. Universal Audio, right? Technically, they are making clones too. The 6176 is based on the 1176 compressor and the 610 preamp, which UA did not invent. All right, Bill Putnam invented the 610, or designed it, or whatever he did. But the Universal Audio Company, right, acquired the company, Teletronics, that invented the 1176. So, in a way, right, UA is also profiting from designs they didn't create, but legally were able to copy. You know, back then they had to purchase the intellectual property rights, or they obtained them when they purchased Teletronics, right? But they didn't invent it. They didn't create it. They were just able to legally make it. Now, does that make them sleazy? Well, that doesn't, not necessarily, right? But it does complicate the narrative that Behringer is the only copycat in the room. It does. It definitely complicates the high ground here. Because this is the thing. What I love about all these forum arguments and everything that people are making. Oh man, I find it very entertaining. Is that here's where the hypocrisy kicks in. Because I see the same people who say, I'd never buy a Behringer clone because they didn't invent it. You know, I mean, are you also using generic pharmaceuticals? Are you taking, off-the-shelf ibuprofen? Are you buying aftermarket car parts or having them used in your car, or even using that computer mouse we just talked about? Does it matter to you that those were not sold to you by the companies who innovated it, right? Or do you even think about that? Or is it just Behringer, right? When you buy the generic ibuprofen, which is the exact same thing, right? You're not supporting the original inventor of the formula. When you replace your car's brake pads with an off-brand part, you're not sending money to the company that first designed them, and yet nobody calls that stealing. So why is Behringer held to a different standard? Is it because audio gear has this almost mythical status in the creative world? Or is it because Behringer's success exposes something uncomfortable about the industry? Now, speaking about uncomfortable truths. Now, let's talk about price. Behringer's 676 costs in the US currently $619. That's with the tariff added onto it. And I'm hoping that goes away, so it can go back down to its international list price of like $500. Right? Isn't that insane? As opposed to Universal Audio's 6176, which retails for $3,500. That's a massive difference. Now, sure, some might argue that UA's price reflects superior build quality, sound, and, brand heritage. And that's fair. But let's be real, a big part of that price tag is also profit margin. Right? So Behringer, on the other hand, owns their factory and supply chain. Behringer has a section in China. I believe it's like a whole neighborhood. It's like a square block of factories that they own. that make the metalwork and everything that they use, right? All their parts, they control their supply chain. They own their own factory. They just opened up a brand new 5th generation automated factory to streamline production even more, right? So they own their factory, they own their supply chain, they streamline production to keep costs down, and they pass those savings on to the consumer. Okay? In many industries, a company that controls its supply chain and production to this extent would be lauded as a model of manufacturing efficiency. But because Behringer is saddled with this reputation of greasy business practices and questionable ethics, which, I don't know how much of that is rumor, conjecture, or truth, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a little bit of all of that in there. So instead of being seen as innovators, brilliant innovators, right? They're viewed with suspicion. It's less about innovation and more about the sleaze, which is totally fair. But hold on. Let's go back to the fact that there is something about Behringer owning their methods of production and supply chain that allows you to buy these products at a surprisingly low price. And they're still making a profit, because they're thinking they're going to sell like 10,000 of these. Maybe like they're going to sell 1,000 a month. They're thinking that they're selling at volume at this price point, right? Nothing wrong with that. You don't have to buy it. Maybe it's not for you. But here's the thing. My question is, does this price reflect the cheapness of Behringer? Or does it reveal and expose that UA is overcharging you like crazy for it? Okay? Not necessarily. But it does raise the question if UA has already recouped their R&D costs, right? Which they almost certainly have after decades of selling the 1176 and 610 and the 6176. Why haven't they lowered their prices then, right? Because if that's part of the argument, that cloners don't have that R&D cost associated with their product, right? They don't have the burden of having to develop the product. But I would say that when you get a 20-year head start as the exclusive provider of that product, if that product is any good, you will recoup your investment. That's the whole point of making that investment in the first place. So look, if UA hasn't recouped their R&D cost by now, that would imply that the 6176 is a commercial failure. But it's not. It's not. I wouldn't call it a legendary piece of gear. It's a well-known piece of gear that I'm sure a lot of us here have looked at and contemplated, thought about it, imagined it sitting in your rack, imagined the sound of it, and then didn't buy it, much like myself. So why the high price on the 6176? And that's the thing, Behringer's existence forces us to ask these questions, and that alone is not a bad thing. Now, I am not a Behringer apologist. I am not. I don't own any Behringer gear. Oh, I do. I own a secondhand, really cheapo audio interface I got for free when I bought a donor mic from somebody when they were getting rid of all their stuff that they bought. But, so I mean, that's the thing. I'm not defending them. I'm just speaking some facts here. I want you to be informed because I think this is a big problem. I think that a lot of the information out there, especially on the forums and stuff, is how do I say this politely? Is echo chamber bullshit. Okay? It's what it is. And here's the thing. Here's something I found really ironic. Okay. Universal Audio's bread and butter is selling software clones of hardware and make sure they're licensed clones, right? These are all licensed from the companies that made them or for older pieces of hardware, like their Neves, their Neve plugin, Neve plugin, their Neve plugin. They've licensed that from the people who made the plugin. Right, which I think was Brainworks or somebody makes a lot of their plugins. Either way, right, they're licensed clones. But does anyone really think that their Neve plugin is superior to a real Neve? Is their cloned software Neve superior to a real Neve? Does anybody actually think that? Or that their Fairchild compressor plugin sounds exactly like the original hardware? Probably not. But we don't see the same outrage directed at UA for their software clones. And why is that? Is it because software feels less real than hardware? Or is it because we've accepted that plugins are just part of the game? I mean, either way, it's funny to think people are mad at Behringer for copying UA when UA is out there making a fortune off software versions of gear they didn't invent either. So last but not least, let's talk about the whole patent thing. Let's talk about trade dress, okay? Trade dress is a protection based on the way something looks, Okay? Now, trade dress and patent law are the things that a lot of people, they've been bantering back and forth about it in their half-assed arguments why Behringer is in the wrong and Behringer's going to get sued and, blah, 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 right? Oh, and just before we go down the road too far with trade dress, here's another key point. Copyright law doesn't apply here. Copyright as outlined in the law, specifically, all right, I'll quote, it's from 17 U.S.C. Section 102. Copyright protects original works of authorship, things like music, art, and literature, but it doesn't cover functional items or designs. So even if Behringer clones look similar to the originals, there's no copyright issue at play. The only potential legal issue here is trade dress. And this is where things get really interesting, because trade dress refers to the visual appearance of the product, right? Like I said, it's design, packaging, overall look that signifies its source. For example, if Behringer made the 676 look exactly like the UA 6176, including a faceplate that looked like the UA logo, right? If you're talking about the branding being very similar, UA could potentially argue trade dress infringement. But here is the thing, all right? Behringer has been pretty careful in avoiding trade dress lawsuits of the original products. They might get close, but they make enough little changes to avoid legal trouble. And on the 6176, it has a broader part in the middle of the faceplate for like the switches and the little power on light. And Behringer moved that over to the right of the front panel. Just a couple of little minor things, right? So it's not a direct copy. It's really close. And it's enough to avoid legal trouble. And even if they didn't, proving trade dress infringement is pretty tricky. Now, according to U.S. law, specifically U.S. patent law, specifically 15 U.S.C. Section 1125, parenthetical A, you can look that up, 15 U.S.C. Section 1125, parenthetical A. Trade dress protection only applies if the design is non-functional and has acquired distinctiveness in the marketplace. So, in other words, if the design of the 6176 is purely functional, like the placement of knobs and switches, right? It is not protected by trade dress law. And it's a simple fact, right? The way the knobs are laid out are just purely functional. And they probably mirror the layouts of older hardware, ancient analog hardware from the era of tubes, stuff that was probably derived from and designed by the same people who designed radios and stuff for the military back in that age. So that's the fact. That's the law. Say we do our research here. But let's break this down further. If Universal Audio or any company wanted to claim trade dress protection for the design of their gear, they would need to show two things. One, non-functionality. The design can't be essential to the product's use or purpose, right? For example, if the layout of knobs and switches is purely for usability, it's functional and not protected. I think that's what we have right here. Two, secondary meaning. And that's how it's defined. And that means consumers must associate the design with a specific brand. This means UA would need to prove that musicians look at the 6176 and immediately think that's a Universal Audio product. Now that is where they may have some traction. But here's the thing. Universal Audio never filed for trade dress protection for the 6176 or the 1176 or the 610B or any 610. There's no trade dress filing for any of that. And if they wanted to actually go after Behringer for the secondary meaning, right, associating the look of this with the look of the 6176 with Universal Audio, they would have to provide evidence Like, what would that be? Consumer surveys, marketing materials, sales data, right? To prove that the design has acquired secondary meaning. And if they haven't done that groundwork, that claim won't hold up in court at all. The 6176 debuted like in the early 2000s, right? I think it was like, I'm trying to think back. I think it was like, yeah, in the early 2000s. And in the 2 decades plus since, they haven't taken any steps to protect its design. Now, that's a pretty big omission, especially for a company that prides itself on brand identity, but I think it's worth noting that UA did file for trademark protection with the USPTO for the 1176. They did. But here's the catch. That trademark only pertains to the category of guitar pedals, and it's a name trademark. That has nothing to do with the circuit itself. So in other words, UA can protect the name 1176 as it applies to guitar pedals, but they can't stop anyone from replicating the circuit or design of the original hardware. And come on, let's not forget that by now, there's no doubt that UA is aware of the Behringer 676. There's no way they don't know. But have you heard or seen a single post, or will you ever hear or see a post that their legal team is looking into it? Because that silence is all the proof you need that UA has no legal standing to oppose Behringer's clone. And look, it's the same thing. Remember when I told you about how UA fired David Bach, a legendary figure in the audio industry, whose company they acquired? And then they fired him, which is one thing, but they happened to do it on the very same day that he put his wife into hospice care. Remember when I told you that story? I never received a single peep from their legal counsel about that. Nobody told me to stop telling that story. Nobody told me to take that down. You know why? Because they had no legal standing to do so, because I did not slander or libel or tell anything that wasn't true. That's why. So yeah. So I mean, let's just put aside any sort of feelings that UA is wearing the white hat. Okay, in general. Are they kind of greasy too? I mean, come on. Look, the truth is no company in this industry is perfect. Behringer might have its issues, but UA isn't exactly a paragon of virtue either. Come on. And let's be real. Is there really a good guy or bad guy here? Or is it just business? And do we just like to attach our emotions to it because our creative audio efforts are so emotional and so personal? Oh, and you know what? I also realize there's some people who are turned off by the idea that the Behringer gear is manufactured in China. You know, a claim on a lot of clone gear is that, you see things like designed in the US or UK, but manufactured in China. And that bugs some people, right? But come on, isn't every single UA Apollo manufactured in China? Let's pretend that manufacturing location is some kind of moral high ground when it's the industry standard. How much do you think that Apollo would cost if it was manufactured in the UK or the US? Or really much of anything, right? A lot of electronics. Do you think if your computer that you're using now was manufactured in a Western country, right, in the US and the UK, do you think you'd be able to afford it? Do you think that company would stay in business? So, I mean, look, there are a lot of issues here that go beyond just the fact that, you think that there's an ethical issue with that. I mean, look, that's how you view the ethics of it that's totally up to you. I'm just trying to explain some facts here. Look, ultimately, and I could have started that sentence with, at the end of the day, but I think that's the stupidest phrase, because at the end of the day, you go to bed. But ultimately, the only thing that really matters is how any of this stuff sounds on your track. Does Behringer gear suck? Maybe, probably. But ultimately, that is for you to decide. If it gets the job done and fits your budget, who gives a flying fuck at a rolling donut what the internet thinks? If you want to hold the moral high ground on Behringer, ask yourself, why do you have a problem with a business practice that's practiced across industries all over the world? Are you really against cloning, or are you just being a Behringer hater because you don't like that someone else might want their gear for whatever reason they desire? Truth is, Behringer is playing by the same rules as countless other industries, right? They're making classic audio gear accessible to a whole new generation of musicians. And look, that's not something to dismiss lightly. Sure, their products might not have the same build quality or mojo as the originals, but they don't have to. They serve a different market, a different sales demographic, one that you may not be part of. This is a demographic that values affordability over prestige. And let me digress for a moment here. You know, when Guitar Hero, that Guitar Hero video game came out, I was always ripping on it, saying that I thought it was total bullshit, and I was offended by the presence of Guitar Hero. And then I spoke to some people who really knew their stuff, and it was explained to me that the presence of Guitar Hero in the marketplace led to a massive explosion of sales of actual musical gear, of actual guitars. People bought guitars because they played Guitar Hero, and enough of them said, "Hey, I'd actually like to play a real guitar." It was a gateway drug to get people to buy actual instruments and become musicians, or at least attempt to. But if anything, the music instrument industry, the MI industry, benefited greatly because of this stupid video game of plastic guitar and you touch the buttons and all that. That has very little to do with making music. But the joy that it brought people inspired them to make music. These are the things I think that, like, really, you know, it escapes us a lot of times. That if buying a Behringer 73 allows a bedroom producer or if some like 12-year-old kid gets one for Christmas and they think it's the greatest thing ever since, video games and Kleenex, then hey, isn't that a great thing? You don't have to like it. You don't have to buy it. It really may not have anything to do with you. You don't have to insert yourself into the equation. But hey, look, if you want to, that's you, right? Look, the only thing that is more divisive than political discourse on the internet is discourse about gear, and in particular, discourse about Behringer. Now, earlier I teased that there is a comment that was left by someone on my channel. And I think this to me is one of the best comments I've ever read on my channel. This really sums it up so perfectly. So at Billy PX3HW, he wrote, "Behringer's like an ex-girlfriend who does all kinds of terrible things to everyone, and you say never again. And then she calls you and tempts you, and she puts crazy ideas in your head. Maybe this time it'll be different, but you already know she's just an awful person. But I'm kind of liking what she's offering me. Oh shit, I can't make up my mind, but we all know which way it's going." That's exactly it. Thank you, Billy. That's perfect. That sums up. That really sums up. That sums up my whole relationship. I think most of our relationships with Behringer. We're all dating the same crazy chick. It's the same, Behringer's the same crazy ex-girlfriend or boyfriend. There you go. So are you going to buy any of that new Behringer stuff? I'm considering it. I am really considering it. And I'll tell you why. I'm just curious. If that 1073 clone, I'm not expecting it to sound like a 1073 at all, like what I would want it to be. But if it has like 75% of the girth, right? And if it has a smooth top end, 75% of the girth, and maybe a little bit more clarity because it's got Midas transformers in it, maybe it has a little bit more of a Nevish sound that would work better for voiceover. I don't know, but you know, the problem with having this gear addiction is I can't make up my mind. All right. So thank you for tuning into today's episode of the Microphone Playboy. What do you think about Behringer's cloning practices? Are they innovators, copycats, or some kind of sleazy thing in between. Let me know your thoughts in the comments or, wherever. You can spray paint it on a wall somewhere. Hey, but, don't forget to like, subscribe, and, hit the notification bell thingy. I guess, I don't know. But until next time, keep creating, keep innovating, keep the conversation going. This is Mark Yoshimoto Nemcoff, fading to black.